Elections will come to order. Welcome back, everyone. I now recognize Mr. Morelle for 5 minutes for the purpose of questioning our witnesses.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank the witnesses for being here and for testifying and for all of your good work. I do want to state my extreme disappointment that Mr. LaRose is not here. I'm not sure what the taxpayers of Ohio invested in his visit to Washington, but the fact that he couldn't stay for 90 minutes with us to come on the sole topic on which I'm sure he was here in Washington is very, very disappointing, particularly since he has appeared on panels about they stole it legally, and I had a number of questions for him, not the least of which is that a disparity between black and white voters in terms of turnout in Ohio being 35%, is the problem that seems to me he ought to be working on the most. If he really truly believes what he said in his testimony relative to Thomas Jefferson's quote about consent of the governed, I think he should have taken a little more care in planning his schedule so he can be with us. I'd hate to think that his leaving early was an effort to avoid any questions about what's happening in Ohio. So I want that in the record. I'm extremely disappointed and feel like it was an effort to evade questioning by this panel. But I do want to thank the witnesses who managed to stay with us for this period of time and thank them for what they do. If I could just start, and I apologize if I do this wrong, Secretary Ardoin. I wonder if you could tell me, do you believe Joe Biden won the 2020 election?
I do believe he won.
You do. Mr. Anderson, do you believe Joe Biden won the 2020 election?
Yes.
Mr. Hewitt, do you believe Joe Biden won the 2020 presidential election?
Wearing my nonpartisan hat, yes, I do.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I did have a couple questions just from the testimony. Secretary Ardoin, what happened prior to 2014 relative to statewide elections? I noticed in your testimony you said since 2014 you've successfully carried out 9 statewide elections in a row. What happened prior to that? Why were they unsuccessful?
They weren't unsuccessful. We just didn't have elections that were back to back to back. For whatever reason, we had special elections and issues that were put on the ballot by the legislature. And so it was, we basically have 4 elections each year, and we usually had 1 year off, and we haven't had that since that time.
Oh, I see. What you meant to say, what you were talking about is the fact that you've had statewide elections in each of those 9 years.
Correct.
Oh,
yes,
I'm
sir.
sorry. Okay. So how do you define ballot harvesting?
Ballot harvesting would be collecting of ballots by individuals that aren't in control of, that aren't the voter themselves. Our law outlawed it for political candidates, political parties, nonprofits, 501c3s, 501c4s, and political parties.
Are prohibited in Louisiana?
Are prohibited, that's correct.
So if you're a nursing home operator and a number of individuals filled out ballots and it was collected by the nursing home to be sent in or to be delivered to the Board of Elections, would that be considered ballot harvesting?
That would be, yes, sir.
Interesting. I also wanted to ask, since you made a significant point in your testimony, how many non-citizens were registered to vote prior to your constitutional amendment in Louisiana?
I don't know how you track non-citizens because the federal government doesn't provide us any information with regards to that.
But you have a constitutional amendment prohibiting non-citizens from registering. How do you, are you required to show proof of citizenship now to register to vote in Louisiana?
Yes, sir.
You're required to show proof of citizenship?
Yes, sir.
Are you purging non-citizens?
Only when we get notice from the federal judiciary in our state or the local judiciary that someone filled out a card saying they couldn't serve because they were a non-citizen.
But you don't, you have an estimate of how many non-citizens were voting in Louisiana?
I do not.
Okay.
If I may, Congressman, the constitutional amendment prevents any local governing authority to allow non-citizens to vote in their elections. It was already in the Constitution that non-citizens couldn't vote.
In Louisiana.
in Louisiana.
Gotcha. I had a question. You talked about, you said our state utilizes a top-down approach to the administration, preparation, execution of elections, and you talk a little about how important that is. Do you think that's important for the federal government to take a top-down approach, or does that only apply to states?
I think it should only apply to states.
What's the difference between the two governments that you'd think a top-down approach at state governments is superior to a top-down approach from the federal government when it comes to federal elections?
Because I think states should be sovereign with regards to elections.
I'm sorry, I only have 5 minutes. I appreciate your testimony, and I'll submit questions in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you.